Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants across the globe. I'm Martel, and I will serve as your moderator for this event. Before we start with the program, let me remind everyone that participants can communicate with one another and coordinate their questions through an option on our streaming platform. To join, go to events.experto.ph, input your name, and accept the terms of service and privacy policy. Then click Join. To ask a question, click the Ask Question at the lower right portion of the chat window and input your question there. There will be a forum at the end of the presentations, and I will select the questions to be raised to our speakers. Kindly keep your chats and questions direct, concise, and respectful. The feedback survey and certificates will be available after the forum. Log in at events.experto.ph, accomplish the feedback survey, and the download button for the certificate will appear. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all our participants across the globe. I'm Martel, and I will serve as your moderator for this event. Before we start with the program, again, let me remind everyone that participants can communicate with one another and coordinate their questions through an option provided on our streaming platform. To join, go to events.experto.ph, input your name, and accept the terms of service and privacy policy, then click join. To ask a question, click the Ask button at the lower right portion of the chat window and input your question there. There will be a forum at the end of the presentations, and I will select the questions to be raised to our speakers. Kindly keep your chats and questions direct, concise, and respectful. The feedback survey and certificates will be available after the forum. Log in at events.experto.ph and accomplish the feedback survey. The download button for the certificate will appear. Without further ado, let me introduce Director for Technology Strategy of Globe Telecommunications and the Corporate Partnerships Manager of EWB Philippines, Mr. Hard Tan, for the opening remarks. Sir Hard, you're on.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome for tonight's webinar series number 3, entitled Human-Centered Design and Engineering. So we've been running this webinar series for 3 series already. And coming from the webinar series 1, which is entitled The Transcending Borders, What Does It Mean to an Engineer from a Developing World? And likewise on the webinar series 2, which is entitled Build Back Better. So I hope that tonight you'll be able to learn something from our distinguished speakers and at the same time ask questions. Take this opportunity for you to learn and be able to assimilate informations about how human-centered design and engineering will look like. Also, I wish to invite everyone to take part and become a member of Engineers Without Borders Philippines section. So you may log on via our Facebook and likewise also check via the internet our website. So looking forward that most of you are participating tonight would be able to also become a member of EWB Philippines. So without much ado, thank you very much and good evening to everyone.
To start this webinar series, our first speaker will discuss about globally responsible engineering. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Engineers Without Borders UK. She's also a board member of Engineers Without Borders International. An engineer by background, she has worked as a consultant in the cities and climate change sector at global consultancy firm Arup. She is passionate about engineering for social and environmental justice. Everyone, let us welcome Katie Cresswell Maynard. You're on, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Martel. Let me just take a moment to share my screen with you all. Put it into presentation. Okay. So hello, my name is Katie. Thank you, Martel, for the fantastic introduction. So I'm currently sitting in my flat in London. So it's an absolute privilege to be here with you today as part of Engineers Without Borders Philippines webinar series. And thank you so much to the EWB Philippines team for organising everything, for inviting myself, and I know you've invited other colleagues from our cousins around the world to take part in your fantastic webinar series. And I think on that note, it's just amazing, you know, that we're able to reach out to one another, work together, share ideas, insight, knowledge, be each other's critical friends, particularly at a time like this, when we need to kind of come together. So I've been asked to talk about embedding global responsibility into engineering. So this is something that's really important to us here at Engineers Without Borders UK. And it very much does speak to the subject topic of human-centered engineering design. So I'm going to carry on. So firstly, I'm going to start with quite a bold statement. So this is one we use. We have no planet B and time is running out. So some of you might recognize that statement. Some of you might agree with it. Some of you might be thinking, that's pretty bold. Where does that come from? So I'm going to talk a little bit about where that comes from in a moment. But if you can just bear with me for a moment and take for the moment that this statement is true. We live on planet Earth. We haven't found another planet to live on. And for the planet that we live on, we are informed by the scientific community that time is running out. We are facing some existential crises, which potentially in the future, in the not too far distant future, will make the planet uninhabitable for the number of people that we already have on the planet, and particular in parts of the world, it will already become not a great place to live. So if we take that statement as true for a moment, what does that mean? What are our options? Well, of course, we could look to find planet B. If planet Earth is not going to be inhabitable for us, then we could look for an alternative. That's one option you could consider. Obviously, the counter to that is saving planet A. So actually focusing on saving the planet that we currently live on for all people and the species that we share the planet with. And in terms of time is running out, well, again, we have kind of a choice between two options here. Whether through ignorance or through our own intention, we can just decide, time's running out, so let's just have a good time with the time that's left. Or the opposite to that is obviously to get cracking on tackling the issue. So just wanted to spend a few moments on this space of maybe we should be investing all of our resources in finding another planet, so that we don't need to worry about saving the planet that we're on. I just wanted to kind of point out a few things for anyone in that space. So interestingly, since the 2nd of November in the year 2000, so that's almost 20 years ago actually not all humans have lived on the planet Earth. About 6 people have continuously been living outside of planet Earth, but not on another planet. They've only been posted on the International Space Station, so orbiting the Earth, looking back, advancing our scientific knowledge about the planet. So yes, it's been 20 years nearly since some of us have genuinely left home, and that opportunity has been enjoyed by around 240 people from 19 different countries who've had that privilege. But the vast majority of them who have had the opportunity to leave the planet and look back have said that actually what it's done is strengthen their desire to protect the Earth as a result. Yes, space exploration and looking for other planets is, an exciting prospect. But actually, for most of them, it's deepened their appreciation of the uniqueness of the planet that we currently live on. And I think this is really well summed up in a quote from Russian astronaut Gennady Padalka, who himself has logged more cumulative days in space than anyone else over his 28-year career. So he says that we're genetically connected to this planet. And to the best of our knowledge, Earth is unique in its ability to support life as we know it. The past decade of astronomy has shown us that we are one among billions of worlds in the Milky Way galaxy, but our tangled web of geology, ecology, and biology makes this strange rock the only one in reach that's just right for humans. There really is no place like home. And I think that point there around the only one in reach that's right for humans really draws me back, if not anyone else who's listening, me back to this option of we've really got to focus on saving planet A. Finding planet B is perhaps possible in some kind of time frame, but not in the time frame that we have left available to us. And so, yes, I don't know about you, but, when I look at the amazing photographs that we now have of planet Earth due to our ability to look back, to leave and look back, these photos really highlight to me how precious and beautiful the Earth is in the wide expanse of space, and really does invoke that similar feeling in me, a strengthened desire to make sure our human impact on this planet is no longer a cause for its destruction, and no longer a cause for meaning that the people that live on this planet do not have a good quality of life to look forward to. So I'm going to say that out of these choices, I'm going to choose Save Planet A and get cracking on with tackling the issue. So what are we doing about it? Well, there's the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm just going to ask Martel and Iman to just help me out here, I think, with a quick poll. We were interested to know how many of you have heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'm hoping and assuming it's quite a large number of you. And secondly, if you've heard about them, what are your opinions about the role that engineering can play in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals? So hopefully there is a poll going up somewhere right now, just to see what the response from the crowd is.
Yes, ma'am, there's currently a poll and we are waiting for the results.
Great, okay. So get participating, be interesting to see what those results are.
Eman, if it's already possible for us to view the results, I'm kindly waiting.
There's still a lot of answers going on. I think we'll just wait a few more seconds.
Great, the suspense is killing me. Exciting.
Okay, so maybe I'll stop right now.
We can do a provisional bit of feedback and then you can carry on counting and we can have a look back at the end as well.
I see. All right. Eman, do you have the number of participants that answered this? So far, ma'am, are you aware about the UN Sustainable Development Goals? 47% said yes, and 52% said no. Out of how many participants, Eman?
Around 200 answered.
Great. And then what about the other, did we ask the other question about whether engineering can play a role in addressing them?
Okay, so that's the second question. Can you kindly put it up, Eman, and we will see the results. Okay, so it's already there, ma'am, and we're waiting for the results as the participants answer.
So whilst you're doing that, then for those of you that haven't heard of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals before, these are a set of goals that were established in 2015. The goals are 15 years in terms of scope. So they are 17 goals which have been identified for the global community to achieve within that 15-year time frame. So now that it's 2020, there are 10 years left to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This is the greatest global consensus that we have on understanding what as human beings, as the whole of humanity, we should be working towards, striving towards, and valuing as a collective. So the goals here, there are both social and environmental in scope. So looking at addressing some of the significant social inequality that lives on the planet, such as the existence of poverty, such as the existence of lack of access to safe water and sanitation, but also about recognizing and addressing that there are some serious environmental issues that need to be addressed. So climate change, for instance, goal number 13 there, life below water, protecting our food sources, for want of a better way of saying it, as well as the biodiversity within our oceans and on the land as well. So I'd highly recommend that you take some time to Google the UN Sustainable Development Goals or other search platform after this to find out a little bit more about them. So Martel, do we have a result on our second polled question?
Oh, all right. So do you think that engineering can play a role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals? So 92% said yes, and 7% said no. Out of how many participants, Eman?
Around 500.
Wow, okay. Okay, well, I'm pleased that the vast majority think that engineering can play a role in achieving them. I'm interested to find out perhaps the viewpoints of those that think it can't. So I'm sure it's not a surprise for all of you to hear that my viewpoint is that engineering absolutely can and must and should play a role in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. If we unpick them, then engineering is at the heart of achieving the vast majority of them. Whether it's the obvious ones like water and sanitation, around providing access to good quality, safe to drink water, dealing with our sanitation, for instance, making sure that the waste that we all produce isn't in our local environment. Those are some of the easy ones to point at. And when we're looking at things like sustainable cities and communities or reducing inequality, there are indirect links with how we engineer the environment around us, how we create our cities, that make them more or less inclusive or exclusive, and therefore create or undermine our ability to be resilient as broad communities. I'd highly recommend going and having a look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And another thing that I wanted to share with you here is actually a model built off of the Sustainable Development Goals that I actually find quite useful from the perspective of an engineer looking at this. So you may or may not have heard of this, but this is a little bit of economics for us. I'm no expert, but there's a new model of economics that's being proposed, which is called donut economics, proposed by an academic known as Kate Raworth. And the idea here is that for everyone on the planet, we want to achieve a social foundation. So minimum kind of standards of living around, access to water and sanitation, ability to achieve a good level of education, the energy we need, the food that we need to live a dignified and good quality of life. But we recognise that we can only do that within the limits of the planet that we live on. So that's where this idea of the ecological ceiling comes in. And that is defined by the 9 planetary boundaries that the scientific community have agreed upon as the limits beyond which, if we exceed them, the Earth potentially could go into catastrophic breakdown, which obviously as the inhabitants of the Earth would definitely not benefit us. So we want to live in this nice kind of the lighter green space in the middle here, which is referred to as the donut, the safe and just space for humanity. But when we actually look at the data as it is at the moment, so this study is maybe like 2 years old now, we can already see that we're not doing very well. So on the inside of the donut, you can see the social foundation here. And what this diagram shows us is that we are already not achieving the social foundation for every person on this planet, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. And at the same time, we're already using more resources than the planet has to offer, and we're exceeding those planetary boundaries. So, we've already definitely exceeded 4 out of the 9. And there's 2 there, which we currently don't have enough information about to make an assessment. So potentially the picture could be worse than that. And so basically what this is saying and telling us is that even in places where we think we may have addressed how to achieve those social foundations, for instance, we're obviously not doing it in a way that is sustainable for every person on this planet, and because we're already doing it and exceeding the planetary boundaries. So we really need to need a fundamental rethink in how we go about our way of life, and obviously as a result, the engineering that supports that way of life. And some of you might be interested to know that there was a study that applied donut economics to the United Kingdom, so where I live, for instance. And not surprising to know that in the United Kingdom, unfortunately, our way of life is significantly exceeding all bar 1 of the planetary boundaries. So we score poorly on all of those things, but we're actually not doing very well on the social foundations either. So, we have people who rely on food banks for free food, that is essentially. for access to food, for instance. So even in a country which, I'm going to make an assumption here, many people look up to as a developed nation, even in the United Kingdom, for instance, we haven't worked out how to live in a safe and just space for humanity. So I think that gives you an illustration of the severity of the problem, and the kind of the scope of the challenge, if you like, is we need new answers. We need different alternatives. No one has worked out how to do this yet. But as the science tells us, and as the Sustainable Development Goals tell us, 2030 is a really important year to aim for, but 2030 is only 10 years away. So that might seem like a short time frame, but what I want to tell you is actually there's a lot that can be achieved in 10 years. And to give you an example of that, this is where I'm coming from. So in London, so this was London 10 years ago. So this is a photograph actually from 2009, so I tell a lie, 11 years ago. And in 10 years, so 2019, this was a photograph that was taken just to show you actually how much can change in 10 years. So the skyline of London, the skyline of many other cities and places around the world will have changed significantly in just a decade. So we do have the opportunity to create change that is quite big, fundamental, and can significantly change the way we live. So I think that gives me, I'm perhaps a bit of an eternal optimist, but it gives me hope that we can do things. So what needs to change? And what needs to change now? Well, my argument is that we need to change what I might refer to as the 101, the basic what is engineering question. Really do need to kind of hunker down on redefining the purpose of engineering. And for me, this is exemplified in this simple phrase that whenever, especially, I don't know if it's the same way you are, but here in the UK, whenever we ask, what is it that engineers do? The classic answer is engineers are problem solvers. And for me, that is the problem, because if we're problem solvers and problem solvers only, we haven't asked the question, well, what problems are we solving? We need to push further back, because otherwise we're limited by the scope of the existing way that we do things. We need to push further back and work out, have we got the right, problems that we're working on solving? So I propose that rather than saying that engineers are problem solvers, can we think about engineers actually as being people who change the way we live? I'm sure you look in the world around you, you can see that everything that you rely on in your day-to-day life has been engineered in some way, shape or form. So there is a direct impact between the engineering that we do and deliver and on us as individuals, as human beings, on us as societies and how our societies function. And then clearly our impact of that is on the environment and the planet that we live on, because we use natural resources in order to shape that environment that we rely on. And I think important here to recognise that there are both positive and negative implications of that. There's so much positive that engineers can do, but unfortunately, because engineers have been involved in human development up till now, and clearly we're facing some significant challenges, which is what the science and Sustainable Development Goals and donut economics is telling us, then engineers can also have, or engineering can have, negative implications too. And so what I'd say is we need to choose, and that word choose is really important because it is a choice. We need to choose a globally responsible approach. So when can we do that? Well, if we look at the sort of traditional process for engineering, it kind of tends to follow this sort of route. So we have this scoping phase, the strategy, the briefing, the concept and definition. Once we've scoped what the issue is, what the design brief is, we then design it. We then, we then make it, whether that's constructing it or manufacturing it, or producing it through some sort of process. We might then hand it over to someone else to operate and maintain it. And then ultimately there's always some sort of end of life. So when can change happen? Well, when we're talking about things like addressing these global challenges, and the example here is from the publicly available standard on carbon management, is realizing that the more thought and intentional thought we put in upfront in the process, and particularly up here in this, scoping and briefing phase, the blue line on that graph there is showing us that that is the important time. That is the important time when we have the ability to influence the engineering design. That window of opportunity to influence the engineering design itself closes the further down the process we get. That doesn't mean it's not possible further down the process. It just means that it's harder to achieve because more and more parameters have been set and agreed and set in stone. And typically we tend to find that as engineers, we get involved in this design stage. And this is where this idea of engineers as problem solvers comes from, because we take the brief and we design against the design brief. We rarely get involved in, well, what is the design brief in the first place? So there's this whole important process up front that actually, with the insight and skills and expertise of engineers involved in it, potentially enables us to much better address the global challenges by actually showcasing to other decision makers at that point that alternatives are possible. We don't necessarily need to build a high-rise building, for instance, in order to achieve densification in cities. There might be alternative options if we take a little bit more time to be creative in this upfront scoping position. So in order to change this, clearly there are some big structural changes in the engineering sector that need to happen in terms of, how we're educated, how we practice, who's involved at what process. And that can be quite daunting and overwhelming. But ultimately, there's always the opportunity for each and every one of us as individuals to make a difference. So it really can start with you. And I think that's about three things. It's about a shift in mindset, it's about a shift in approach, and it's about new skills and knowledge. And all of those things are within our control as individuals. So starting with mindset, there's this famous quote by a management guru, Stephen Covey, which talks about this word responsibility. And basically, if you break down the word responsibility, you can see that it's made up of responsibility. So your ability to choose your response. And so when we're talking about what does a globally responsible mindset look like, it's about saying that you have the choice to be driven by social and environmental justice. Yes, it might be hard, but you still have that choice at the end of the day. You can choose to challenge and consistently ask, how can we do this together? So as engineers, we're always working in teams. We rarely work alone. So, are you the person that can put your hand up and say, is there a way that we can do this better? Can we serve all people and the planet better than we have before? Have we actually raised and asked that question? And then also there's that personal aspect. So, how can I do this better? That consistent challenge to yourself. How can I do this better? Am I accepting the status quo? Am I going back to, that choice around time is running out and saying, oh, well, there's not a lot I can do. Let's just enjoy it whilst it lasts. Or am I really kind of pushing myself to say, let's get started right now because, there's not a lot of time left. In terms of approach, so Martin Luther King is quoted as saying, you're not only responsible for what you say, but what you do not say. And I think this applies to our actions as well. So, you're not just responsible for the actions you take, but the actions that you don't take. So whether, you're doing it consciously or not, the choice to not act or to not include something in your actions, recognizing that as an active choice, not a passive one. So, this is about being aware of your responsibility, aware of our responsibility of engineers, not just to the technology, but to the social and environmental implications of that technology. And therefore being really intentional in our approach to how we approach engineering design. And crucially, making sure that we're critically reflecting on the scope. So an interesting example for you, the consultancy I used to work for, they worked on the Terminal 4 at Heathrow Airport here in the west end of London. The original brief was that there were too many cars arriving, so they needed a bigger car park. And so they could have just accepted that that was the brief they were working to. Okay, we need a bigger car park. Let's look at what space is available. How does that affect, local road infrastructure, for instance? But actually taking that opportunity to step back and take a critical approach, they looked at the data and realised that the timing, the peak timing, that most of the time actually the car park was fine. It had big enough capacity, but there were peak times that actually associated with particular flights coming in. And what was happening is those particular flights coming in were associated with people coming from a cultural background where if one person arrives in the country, 5 families go to greet them. So, a large number of people were arriving to pick one person up from the airport. So actually what they discovered was, rather than building a whole new kind of car park infrastructure to support during this peak time, actually, if they just changed the timings of those flights so they were more spread out rather than all coming in at the same time, that actually they could use the existing car park infrastructure to address the issue that was being faced. So that's really about critically reflecting on the scope. Do we even need this car park? Do we even need this building? Do we even need this, rail line, for instance, in the first place? Actually, what's the human issue at the heart of this? And is there another way of approaching it? And so that is about considering and including the social and environmental dimensions. So looking outside of the traditional scope of engineering, which is historically always looking at the technology. And making sure that we're reaching out beyond our borders of engineering, actively engaging, listening to, and valuing diverse insight and expertise. There is no way that we will know how the scope of work will change or could change if we don't engage the people that will be affected by it. There's an interesting question around, do we even need a building at all? Well, we as engineers can't answer that unless we engage the people who have requested the building. So, those are the sorts of things where actually pushing further back along the design, along the engineering process, back into that scoping phase and really critically assessing the scope that we've been given actually creates a whole new opportunity for new outcomes to be delivered. And I think that provides all of us with an exciting space to be much more innovative. But there's something here as well about valuing diverse insights. So I'm not sure what it's like where you are, but I know in the UK culturally that expert voices are valued over non-expert voices. So you will find that an engineer perhaps would be seen as the expert in the room. And if they're engaging with members of the community, so members of the public, for instance, the voices of the public will be valued less, even if they have a really great idea about how to tackle exactly the same issue. So are we genuinely listening and valuing all voices that can inform the decision making? And this really comes down to this idea of designing with rather than designing for. It's about kind of taking a step back and saying, we're designing this together. I have particular expertise as an engineer that I can bring to the table, but I don't know all the answers. I need to collaborate with people, and I need to collaborate with a broad spectrum of people in order for this to be a successful outcome. Rather than me going off into a room on my own, coming up with something and presenting it back and saying, great, I've designed this for you. Are we actually challenging ourselves to design with people rather than for them? And look for the non-technology options too. So the example I gave you earlier of the airport and the car park, ultimately it was a non-technology option. It was a human behavior change option that actually was the answer. So being open for that innovation and ingenuity to come in. So kind of making space for the non-technology options, not always reaching for technology as the answer. And then finally on sort of knowledge and your knowledge and skill set. So I think it's really important that as professionals, we challenge ourselves to continuously learn. You know, again, here in the UK, I'm not sure, you know, how this translates to other countries around the world, but we tend to think, you know, we do our university degree, we get that, and then that's our education done. The world is changing so fast. We really do need to value much more, you know, the need to continuously learn. So make sure that you are continuously learning. Being aware that inequality and injustice exists, and that engineering plays a role in both addressing those, but also continuing for those to happen. And for me, this is about looking for those case studies that we can learn from. So look for the case studies of engineering that, you know, really tell the story of how it has or has not addressed social and environmental injustice. Know how to be inclusive. So I mentioned before, in approach, actually being inclusive is really important for the process. But how do you do it? So look for the methods and the models that you can use to make sure that voices are heard and are included. And knowing how to assess and balance multiple factors. So there's something about how engineering is promoted that makes us think it's purely science. When actually a lot of engineering decision making is based on our judgment. And so there's an art associated with that, if you like. You know, we are continuously being asked to look at multiple factors and decide what is the best compromise. You know, we always talk about maximum efficiency, optimization, but actually what we tend to do most of the time is, what's the best compromise? You know, we're always going to compromise on something. So being very intentional and aware of what we are compromising on in order to achieve. So, you know, are we conscious of what we are balancing in terms of those multiple factors? And again, sort of knowing what options exist that aren't business as usual. So this kind of comes back to this point of continuously learning. Are we really aware of the alternatives? So I was at an interesting event these last couple of days around the built environment, and the UK government have set themselves a target of zero carbon by 100% reduction, so at true zero carbon by 2050. Now, given the way that cement is currently manufactured and the research going into it, there is very little hope at this point in time that cement, and therefore concrete, will be legal as a building material in the UK after 2050. Nobody knows how to build buildings without concrete. You know, is anyone looking at the alternatives? Do we know what options exist for us in a world where we can't use concrete? So are we genuinely looking into those alternatives and bringing them to the fore? So challenge yourself to explore, you know, the unexplored, if you like. So in conclusion, just really wanted to say that the future is in our hands. You know, we talk about achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We talk about ensuring that we're saving planet A. That is a choice that we make. And that is something that we can do or we won't. But we have to ask ourselves, which future are we choosing, and are we intentional in our approach around that? So for me, this is about mindset, choosing to make a difference. It's about approach, so being critical, intentional, and inclusive in our approach. And it's about what we know, so knowing how engineering can help, but also can hinder progress towards the future that we've chosen. And ultimately, you know, it is about working together. No one person is going to have the answer. There's unlikely to only be one answer. There is huge power, innovation and creativity in diverse, multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary teams. And so this truly is about learning to work together, and work together in a way we've never worked together before. So thank you very much for listening. And I'm now going to hand you back to Martel, I think, to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Katie, for that insightful presentation. Let me remind everyone that should you have any questions with regard to Ms. Katie's topic, you may send them through the chat window of our streaming platform. Selected questions will be asked during the forum after our second speaker. Before we proceed, our partner, Manila Water Foundation, has an exciting campaign to share to everyone about engineering excellence. To tell us more about it, we have the Special Programs Manager of Manila Water Foundation, Floraceli Masaho Hernandez. Whenever you're ready, ma'am.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Martel. So let me share my screen. So tonight I'll be sharing with you Manila Water Foundation's program to promote engineering innovations in the Philippines. No, so we are very thankful for inviting us in this webinar because we see that the theme for tonight is very fitting to the advocacy that we want to promote through the Manila Water Foundation Prize for Engineering Excellence, which I will be sharing with you tonight. So before I go into details, let me introduce to you our organization, Manila Water Foundation. And then later on, I will be sharing with you some of the activities that we do where you can participate in and as we promote the prize. So to start, let me share with you a glimpse on who we are as an organization. So Manila Water Foundation, or MWF, is the social development arm of the Manila Water Enterprise. Um, yeah. So in MWF, we always say that we go where the company cannot. So we operate nationwide, especially in marginalized communities. Our core advocacy is WASH, or water access, sanitation, and hygiene. Um, we basically work with communities in solving their water and sanitation problems by building infrastructure which they see fit for their situation. So earlier in the event, we heard Katie telling us about promote telling us on engaging human centered approach or involving the communities in the things that we do. So that's what we want to do as well in the foundation. And we are very proud that all of our programs are anchored and support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Specifically for our department, the Special Programs team, we support the achievement of the SDG 9, specifically Target 9.5, through the promotion of the Manila Water Foundation Prize for Engineering Excellence and the Experts Bureau. So now let's go into details of the Manila Water Foundation Prize for Engineering Excellence. So the prize is a biennial award or a search for outstanding engineers who work towards positive change for marginalized communities in the country. So it is the first and only award-giving body that recognizes the work of engineers across all engineering fields. The prize is first launched in 2015 in partnership with the Department of Science and Technology and the Philippine Technological Council. So as our partners in this program, DOST and PTC serve as members of the technical working group. They help us in crafting the mechanics and the criteria, and of course, in the continuous improvement of the program through thorough evaluation and creative innovation. If you happen to be among the official candidates of the prize, um, DOST and PTC will also help us in evaluating the candidates during the initial screening, the semifinals, and the final judging. So now that we know the proponents of this program, you may be wondering why we are doing this or why do we pursue this type of program. So initially, we launched the program to serve as a tribute to the engineering profession because majority of the talents or the employees of the Manila Water Company are engineers. So they really play a vital role in running the business. But looking at the big picture, we pursue the prize for the following reasons. So first, we want to recognize and celebrate the ingenuity of our Filipino engineers. Second, we believe that the simplest and even the most complicated problems we face can be solved through engineering solutions. So we want to support that and also serve as a bridge on how these innovations can be used for the improvement of lives, especially of those who are often neglected and marginalized. So lastly, we want to inspire the Filipino youth to pursue a career in this field and be part of the solution. So speaking of solutions, let's take a look at the awardees of the prize who in one way or another inspired to get things done and solve various issues in the country. So over the past 5 years, the prize was able to identify 10 awardees. In 2015, during our first edition, there were 5 awardees, including Dr. Enrico Paringit, who is now the Executive Director of the DOST-PSURD, and Dr. Joel Marciano, who is the first Philippine Space Agency Director General. So those are among the 2015 awardees. And during our second run or second edition in 2017, we have a lone awardee in the name of Dr. Ricardo Orje of the Philippine Rice Research Institute. So he stood out for his invention, which helped provide additional livelihood for farming communities and make farming processes more simple. And on our latest edition in 2019, we have 4 awardees who show that engineering projects can be used to improve the quality of life and even save lives. So those are Dr. Francis Aldrin Uy of Mapua University. We also have engineer Alexis Belonio, also from the Philippine Rice Research Institute. We have Dr. Ruel Mojica from the Cavite State University and Dr. Michael Gragasin of Philmec. So right now, let's determine who are the ones eligible to join the prize. So basically, we have 2 major qualifications. So the first one is that you should be a licensed or certified Filipino engineer who is actively practicing for at least 10 years and 10 years. And then second, you must have an engineering project that has been implemented in the Philippines and that served and created positive impact for marginalized communities. So to join, you may either apply or be nominated to the prize by any individual, provided that you have a valid endorsement letter and you will be able to submit all the requirements to join. So tonight, I will not be sharing or I will not be flashing the list of requirements. I will just be sharing that with the secretariat so that they can send it to you. But I also understand that majority of the attendees for tonight are students and young engineers who may not be qualified yet for the prize. But I also encourage you guys to nominate the engineer who you think embodies the character of an awardee of the Manila Water Foundation Prize for Engineering Excellence. So that could be your professor in your school or your mother, your neighbor, or somebody who you consider as your mentor. So this is open for all engineers across all engineering fields. So with that, I would like to invite everyone for the 2021 edition of the prize, either by sending your entries or by nominating a qualified engineer. We will officially launch the fourth run on March 4, 2021, which is next year, as part of the celebration of the World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development. So this will also mark the opening of the submission of entries. I know that we are still several months away from that time, but we want to take advantage of the time that we have right now to really reach out to more engineers and promote the prize and also our advocacy. And of course, to encourage you to prepare the entries early. So in line with that, I would like to invite you to our online activities, which you can participate with. So recently, we launched our online communities on Facebook groups and Viber community, which is called the Engineers for Excellence. So I hope that you can join us in these platforms to be part of the growing community of Filipino engineers who want to make a difference. So likewise, these channels will serve as our main platforms for the important updates about the prize. And as an additional perk for being a member, our awardees will also share with you tips on how to prepare the entries and also how to do well in the different phases of the prize if ever you become an official candidate. So aside from the online communities that we have, we are also having our webinar series, which will feature our the awardees of the prize. So in this 3-part webinar, our awardees will share how their projects help the nation in its battle against the COVID-19 pandemic and its adverse effects. So this project is part of our Experts Bureau program, which aims to continuously engage our awardees and, of course, help them in popularizing their projects. So to register to the webinars, you may join the online communities, which I have mentioned earlier, and you may also visit our Facebook page, Manila Water Foundation, for further updates. So with that, I will end my presentation. I hope that this program inspired you to be an engineer for social good and an engineer who has the passion for innovation and the heart for service. So thank you very much. Over to you, Martel.
Thank you for that, ma'am. And I suppose for everyone, for every participant who want to join the program, just follow what Ma'am Shelly said, join the Facebook groups, and stay tuned for updates. Our next speaker will discuss human-centered product development, innovation consulting firm Embiggen Consulting, and the hyperlocal community commerce platform Neighborly. He serves as the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Far Eastern University Institute of Technology Innovation Center. Everyone, let us welcome Roland Marco Garcia.
Good evening. Let me know, guys, if you can see my screen and if you can if you can hear me.
Yes, sir, you're audible and the screen is already shared.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you very much for the previous speaker, Miss Katie. I do agree it's very important for us to design globally responsible innovations and to be a global ambassador for the United Nations UN SDG. I'm also very excited with the awards, wondering who's going to be winning this year as an innovator in the field, in different engineering fields, which I think is a perfect segue to my talk tonight, which will focus on innovation through human-centered design. As a background, last year I was awarded as a fellow for the U.S. Department of State, specifically focused on innovation. Currently also a tech entrepreneur and an innovation and strategy consultant. These are some things that we're currently applying human-centered design and engineering and enabling innovation that is currently very focused on the user, very focused on making the lives of people easier, which I think that as an engineer, as a designer, as an innovator is the core being of innovating to begin with. And personally, I think that we need more entrepreneurs and innovators. There are a lot of problems in the world, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, where there are massive shifts in consumer behavior, massive disruption in economic activity all over the world. And entrepreneurs, technopreneurs, and innovators like you are the people that I am precisely confident can solve all of these particular problems, whether it be social, whether it be political, even, making people's lives better. I 100% believe that it can be solved by technical people and in general innovators. Okay? We also need job creators. Millions of people have been laid off from their jobs, unable to take care of their families because of the COVID-19 pandemic, because of the massive economic shifts that happen. And I believe that innovators are economy builders. Innovators like you, technical people like you, are nation builders. And I truly believe that economic empowerment, innovation is one of the greatest pillars for economic empowerment in the macro sense, as well as, yourself. And this is where we launched the concept. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before. I wrote a paper in Futures Thinking, and how will Philippine corporations innovate in the next decade? And the crucial answer to that is, in the next 10 years, intrapreneurs or corporate innovators will be the lifeblood of if and when corporations will survive this black swan event, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. And that we've seen that in an emerging economy like the Philippines, it's very, very important, number one, for us to solve the problems internally, but secondly, for us to solve the problems in our society. And there are certain principles that we can employ, but at the center of that is human-centered design, is human-centered innovation. Because I don't think all of these innovation principles or technical principles will work without people at the core. We are designing for people as the end user, helping people. And I believe that innovators like, for example, Steve Jobs, are people who espouse thinking different. And I'm very inspired by his life, in especially when he designs technology that basically changed the way individuals have perhaps created interacted with technology. His technology, while it is very, very advanced, is also deeply, deeply rooted in who are using his technology. This is where I think that when he said that for Apple for his company to think different, he actually espouses that with the products, the hardware, the software, and everything they designed um, very well. He was a person who really walked the talk. To talk about how we can actually do this, and I won't go into much academic sense, but as an entrepreneur myself, as an innovator, I'm currently building 3 companies, aside from my position as an innovation director in one of the biggest universities in the Philippines. The core is the build, measure, learn loop. Everyone has ideas. However, the problem that we've seen in society, or even myself, as an engineer, as a designer, as an innovator, sometimes the things that we design are ego-centered. We think it's a good idea, but will your users think it's a good idea? 90% of innovations fail precisely because they create innovations that no one wants, no one will use, right? Because it doesn't solve a real problem. And it happens in corporate innovation labs, in R&D labs, and even as an entrepreneur. Because what they do is that they, number one, they don't have an iterative process to be able to create innovation, products, services. Right? And so I believe that this loop is central to building an innovation, and as human-centered innovation at that. So everything starts with an idea. Right? You build the minimum viable product, which is the MVP. The MVP is the least product features you can to be able to already interact with their customers, interact with the people who will actually use your product. If you're designing prosthetics, for example, for people who have no limbs, right? You need to be able to deploy an early version of the product to be able to know if that particular person, if you are actually helping that particular person, right? From the building part, you now measure customer interactions. You now measure user interactions. You also measure qualitative and quantitative KPIs. Right? From that, you have the data. When you learn, you now go back to the drawing board. And you now create from this falsifiable hypotheses or things that you can experiment on. Because innovation, I believe, or being able to create a human-centered innovation, such as bridges, robotics, electronics, right? It will need a lot of iteration, prototyping. Right? But at the end, at the core, Industries won't exist without people. So the central thesis of human-centered design will be, how are you able to iterate? How are you able to innovate iteratively? Innovations won't, it's, to put it simply, it is a trial and error process, but you need to be able to do what we call innovation accounting. How do you measure learning? Is learning a currency of innovation? Yes, it is. In the corporations, this is why in my firm, in my innovation consulting firm, you cannot apply what we tell the corporations. You cannot apply regular management practices to managing innovation from within your companies, because learning is a currency of success in an innovation. Failure in innovating is a crucial part of innovation management. And lastly, because you are talking about people, people are complex beings. They have very different needs. They don't know that they need this particular product or service or innovation before they, actually use it. Right? And to be able to create that learning process, it starts with a build, measure, learn loop. Right? For you to be able to interact with your customers, with your users, as an engineer, as a technical person, a lot of engineers think that it's not applied to me because I am a technical person. Right? I only need to know vector forces or the laws of physics or all of these codes, right? However, at the core of what you're designing, people are going to use it. Right? So you need to have some level of people interaction. Actually, to be honest, as a tech person, you actually need to have a crucial interaction with your customers, with the people you're designing for, right? And people you're thinking of solving a problem for. Right? And the build, measure, learn loop, the central part there is our human beings. Okay? A lot of people also, what I've seen in my engineering practice, my innovation practice for the past decade, is that a lot of people ask the superficial questions, right, without addressing the actual core problem. Where did this problem come from to begin with? Right? And it happens by asking the core question, right? And usually at the end of that meta synthesis of all of these questions is that when you ask the question, right, the last why question, right, at the answer will usually fall with, what are the problems of people that I'm going to solve? It will always boil down to, who are you solving the problem for? If you're creating a new, perhaps a VR technology or perhaps a blockchain technology, at the end of the day, it will still be people. Industries, again, are created by people. So the core problem will always be about people, will always be about solving problems in society, will always be about making people's lives easier and better. And a lot of things are happening in the world, and you can do your own part in solving that problem, right? And however, you must be able to ask the right questions, which usually is about the person. It's usually about populations of people. Be people-centered and be impact-driven. I totally agree with what Katie mentioned a while ago about the SDGs. And there's currently I'm currently in the tech ecosystem, and there's been a rising shift in investors investing in innovations, companies, or tech innovations, right, that are impact-driven. So this is new field of impact investment. And even if you're not an impact investor, right, meaning as an investor, is this particular company I'm investing in, does it really solve a problem that most people have? Is it socially responsible? Is it environmentally responsible? These questions, right? So this stark increase in impact investing in the world as we've also seen not only in London, in Silicon Valley, but even in tech centers like India, tech centers like, for example, in our in the East, right, like Singapore, or even in the Philippines. There are a lot of angel investors, venture capital firms that are already looking for socially responsible innovations, impact-driven innovations. Basically, they ask the question: is this technology for the betterment of the world, of the earth, of human beings? It is not, we're shying away from purely profit-driven investments. But the KPIs, right, are now about how big of an impact does this company, does this innovation actually create for people. Okay? And these are basically just mindsets of how you design for people. First mindset would be spotting a nagging problem for different groups of people and developing a scalable, improved solution to fix it. Second one is there an existing solution for people that is already present in different parts of the world that you might be able to hyper-localize in a specific economy or an emerging market? We've seen this with the Uber or Lyft, hyper-localization in Southeast Asia, which is Grab. Also, is there a new way of doing things? Right? Application of the old to the new. Right? And we've seen this in the telephone, and we've seen this in different industries already. Instagram, Kodak being disrupted, Nokia being disrupted. Right? And innovation, because Nokia thought that they're too big to fail. Right? Kodak thought they were too big to fail. Right? Innovation wasn't at the core. They didn't realize that there were shifts in consumer behavior that they weren't able to address. Right? So can you apply something old to a new consumer behavior? One of my companies, for example, that we're building is called Neighborly. It is a startup focused on hyper-local community commerce, because we've seen massive shifts of community-centered e-commerce that are happening not only in the Philippines, but in different parts of the world. And we're applying the old concept, which we saw was e-commerce, to a new consumer behavior, which was hyper-local community commerce, which are groups of people in a small community transacting food, transacting sanitary materials, transacting services. Right? Mindset number 4 is basically our macro trends. Macro trends such as the work from home macro trend. Can you design a solution with the work from home industry that have been forcibly accelerated because of the COVID-19 pandemic? How will you enable that particular consumer behavior? Remember, as an innovator, you want to design for these particular people who are having problems, perhaps, with working from home because they need that social interaction, right? As an engineer, as a hardware engineer, for example, how can you improve internet connectivity? Right? Because of the work from home a trend, of a macro trend, right? As an innovator, what are trends that you can see, that you can spot, that you can solve problems that arise from those particular trends? Right? And of course, genuine innovation, something entirely novel. Right? Blockchain before was entirely novel, right? It's for people, right? But then again, you have to have people in mind, right? And lastly, where do you think the industries will go? Where do you think? How do you think people will interact, especially now with COVID-19? Right. 10 years from now, how do you think buildings will look like? Right? How do you think spaces will be designed as a civil engineer? How do you think robots will be able to aid unmanned vehicles or non-contact solutions, right? And I think it prods a lot of question, especially during when COVID-19 actually exploded, right? What will the future of industries look like? Right? for an innovator and you're a people-centered innovator, you would think, how would people live 10, 20, 30 years from now? In designing a solution for that future. Right? I think, just to end it, I won't go into details anymore. Perhaps you can add me on social media. We can talk for us to be able to discuss these mindsets and frameworks more. But I leave you with this. As an innovator, today is your opportunity to build the tomorrow that you want. And to be able to do that, you need to be designing for people. Innovation, tech for good, should be at the heart of what you're designing for, right? And what you're designing about. Right? So, fellow engineers, I do hope you learned something tonight. And I encourage you to create innovations to solve problems for society and solve problems for the earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roland, for that inspiring talk. So at this point, select questions will now be answered by our panel. Katie Cressel Maynard, Roland Marco Garcia, Hardtan, and Florasheli Masaho Hernandez. If our panel would be so kind, may I request everyone to open their cameras and their audios whenever answering. So let me go through the list of questions first. All right, so we have one from, okay, it's an anonymous question. So anyone can answer. So what are the pros and cons of sustainable development goals? Again, it can be addressed to anyone specific, not specifically to anyone.
I mean, I'm just thinking about what the cons are, to be honest. I think the pros are that it, you know, we need to be careful to avoid thinking that one kind of cultural view on the world and what the world should be focusing on is the right one. So, you know, and clearly I come from a culture that is renowned for having done that historically. You know, the British do not have a good track record in terms of, you know, colonization of the rest of the world and imposing our thoughts and our way of doing things on other people. So I think there is definitely a pro of the Sustainable Development Goals in that it represents one of the largest global consensuses across multiple nations, you know, the majority of the nations on the planet, on, you know, what it is we should be focusing our human effort on. So for me, that's a huge pro. In terms of cons, I mean, I think the only con I can think of is have we missed something? You know, if, for instance, if we focused on zero carbon rather than zero pollution, which I don't think is what the Sustainable Development Goals were, for instance, but if we missed something off the list, you know, so if we focused on zero carbon, and to take the example of a car, you know, how do we make a car better? Then you're only looking at the carbon emissions coming out the exhaust pipe. Well, air pollution is also caused by the particulates that arise from the interaction between the tire and the road. So if we were only looking at carbon, we would miss out on that whole other area of air pollution that's created. You know, we can still damage the environment, we can still impact on people if we neglect to kind of think really holistically. So for me, I'm struggling to think of a con other than have we missed something off the list? But really interested in what Roland and Chelly think as well.
Hello, Miss Katie, or for everyone. Hello. Just like a little concern about this, maybe in relation to that question, maybe it's more of, because in the SDGs there is there's a goal for economic prosperity, like providing a provision of housing for all or for better jobs for all. So how do you balance that goals, that there are goals that the needs are will be addressed by getting something from the environment or getting like additional land for the housing? So how do you balance that? So maybe the question is going to that. Maybe there's a con on how do you balance on those kinds of goals.
Are there contradictions within the Sustainable Development Goals themselves? I mean, I don't want to dominate the response to the question. but I think it's a challenge. That's the challenge it presents for us, as the people, kind of dealing with those interacting factors. I think it does kind of come back to that point around, do we really understand what the problem is? And are we only thinking in terms of what we already know? Have we actually explored the innovation available to say, well, actually, how do we create the cities around us in a way that's perhaps reusing existing things that we've already dug out of the ground, or regenerating what is there, rather than continuously thinking about how we do things as pure consumption.
Yep.
Roland, you look like you're going to say something.
Yeah, I don't think there are cons, only pros. But generally, as with any movement, there will be challenges. The challenge, for example, of perhaps what would you prioritize first, the environment or economic prosperity. Challenges like, especially for emerging markets where the resources, like the Philippines, right? The resources are scarce, and the governments aren't centralized or fixed, right? There are certain challenges in that particular part. So I think the challenge is prioritization, challenge of consistency, and challenge of really political power, right? And social movement. Right? But in general, to answer that question directly, I do not think there is any con to the SDG. I think we should all do our part in, even as an entrepreneur, even if you're not a social impact entrepreneur, even if you're a tech entrepreneur, you should always be thinking of how can this be something that will save the planet, the society, and how will it impact people.
Yeah, so I just want to add to that. Well, coming from a development sector perspective, well, sometimes since we are very much working with grassroots communities and marginalized communities, the UN SDGs can be viewed as something that is very prescriptive to some. So, but well, not really a con, but it could be a watch out that maybe we have to focus on how to really put forward the advocacies that we want in attaining in line with in attaining the SDGs through with the needs and the cultural perspective of the communities that we work with, or we really have to implement something that is more participatory, that will consider their situation, and that will be really tailor fit to their needs, and not just something that we will prescribe to them. So that's a watch out, and also a challenge for us who work in this field, that we have to always really look into what's best for them, and not what we think is best for them.
Okay, so thank you for those answers, our panel. So before we proceed, a lot of our participants are asking if we could have the PowerPoint presentation shared to them. So what do you guys think?
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
Why not? Yeah.
So Eman, how will we do that? Can the participants contact you instead?
They will just have to log in also to the Experto. So I will make it the link available tomorrow.
All right. Okay. So again, for the participants who are in need or are interested to get the presentations, you may get it through experto.ph and access it through there. Okay, on to our next question. It's from Alina Tam Andres, and I think this is specifically for Sir Roland. As a young engineer in a developing country, are there any programs that will encourage us to engage more in the field of technopreneurship?
A lot of programs, right? So we work with a lot of incubators, investors, and accelerators in places like London, places like Silicon Valley. But in the Philippines, there are a lot of, like, for example, my business partners are Silicon Valley trained Filipinos who are tech entrepreneurs. Programs like what we just launched this week in FEU Tech, which is an incubation program for, I think, one of the current largest incubation cohort in the history of undergraduate education in the Philippines. There are 150 aspiring technology entrepreneurs and founders. You have places like Idea Space, QBO, and I think in your different universities, there are also incubation programs. Um, are they allowed? I mean, perhaps you can search your school if you have an incubation program or some kind of support. But if you don't, I'd be very happy to connect you to the Department of Science and Technology and QBO. To be able to support you in your technopreneurial journey as an innovator, as a young engineer. So as a to answer that question directly, yes, there are plenty and plenty of programs to support your interests to becoming a tech startup founder.
Okay, thank you for that, sir. And do note that, participants. Okay, specifically for the Engineering Excellence Program of Manila Water, this comes from Rai Rosel Vargas. Among the winners of the prize, were there any projects that that you have supported that eventually became a part of everyone's daily life?
Yeah, actually, all of the programs or the projects that our awardees are already implemented before even before they joined the prize. But the top of mind project, which really became part of everyone's life, is engineer Alexis Belonio's technology, which is the multi-fuel gasifier stove. So this is a very simple technology which made use of the usual farm wastes like rice hull or the rice straws, which are often left on the roadsides in the countryside or being disposed in waterways. So what we don't know is that these materials, when they decay, release methane in the to the air, and it becomes more harmful. So what he did is to convert this into a source of fuel by converting it into a gas that is smokeless and which can be used as an alternative for liquefied petroleum gas for households. So currently in areas in Bulacan and Nueva Ecija, you won't see any rice straws or rice hull in the roadsides anymore because these are being sold already for and which also serve as an additional livelihood for the farmers. So instead of purchasing the LPG, which is around 600 pesos um, for 11 kilos, I think they just use a sack of a rice hull for around 10 pesos per sack, and then they use it for a week supply of fuel for their household. So um, Engineer Bologna is very remarkable as well because he also shared the design to become open source so that other countries or other any innovators could also commercialize the technology. So he even won an award for this from Rolex as an entrepreneur. There.
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, I suppose we also there are a lot of participants that want to continue the topic of SDG as well. So on to our next question from Lily Antoinette Agustin. How can engineers help their country when their government is not active in promoting and achieving the SDG goals, or given that they have low funds or poor technology in terms of implementing it? Again, anyone can answer.
Yeah, I'll start by answering the question because I'm deeply involved in the such kind of challenge in terms of funding. So what we do is, especially in the diverse organization where I belong, one is basically this EWB, and I'm currently chairing the Philippine Technological Council Young Engineer section, and likewise also that Radio Engineering Circle, where it's an amateur radio club organization. So what we do is that since these organizations where I belong, we adhere towards UN and support UN Sustainable Development Goals, is that we reach out also to other org and we seek funding with able people and able organization whom is gonna be willing to fund certain projects and support it. So we don't stick with asking for the government for some sort of financial support, but we reach out to other people and able organization. At least starting from yourself, you promote change. So that's the key point there. So reach out to other people who's the same endeavor like you or same principle will help one another. It's a form of what we call malasakit. So it's something for the young engineers also to pursue. Don't throw away your principles and your adhikain in life. Okay? So there are other people of similar purpose who will live up their life to support and to help also other people in terms of adhering towards UN Sustainable Development Goal. So reach out and explore other alternatives. Thank you, Martel. That's on my part.
Can I try to answer that also, Martel? Is that okay?
No, yes, go ahead, sir.
I I mentioned earlier that impact investing is accelerating globally. Right? This is already a trend in Silicon Valley, in the UK, and even in Israel, which is a very innovative country, Singapore perhaps. And a lot of investors right now are pinning their investment decisions and deal flow with respect to how many SDGs are you actually solving or contributing on. And I think this is a very good thing. Apart from investing, there are incubators and startup accelerators that are solely focused on social impact ventures. Things like, for example, in PhilDev, right, the ESIP project. This is a innovation accelerator specifically for innovations that have big societal impact, or a tech for good blueprint. So while the government is sort of in the Philippine government sort of archaic in in these funding opportunities, especially in emerging markets, which I think is a global phenomenon anyway. But there are institutions that are not government institutions that support a lot of tech for good projects.
Martel, if it's okay, just to add something to what Roland just said, I think just to add, that issue isn't unique, as Roland just said, to places like the Philippines. We face the same here in the UK. I think it's about saying what you are trying to do and what we are trying to do is go against the grain and go against the status quo. So it doesn't matter whether it will be the government, it will be the head of the company, it will be the managers, it will be the clients, you will hit hurdles. And there's no getting away from the fact that it will be hard, which is why I think what Gerard said about find your allies, the support network, because you have to keep going. If you're passionate and you want to stick to your principles, it's going to be very easy for you to find reasons why you should give up. So, find that support network, the other people who share the common goal. And it's about working together, collaborating with one another, finding ways to overcome those hurdles, particularly if you want to be the intrapreneur rather than the entrepreneur, inside a big kind of company that you want to change. I think that's where the hardest changes will have to happen, but they need to happen nonetheless. And as Roland said, there are some, top-down changes that are happening at the same time. So take comfort in the fact that things are changing. Unfortunately, for some of us, we think they're probably not changing fast enough.
I suppose before we proceed, it's already 9:30. Can I invite the speakers to still stay to accommodate for other questions?
Sure.
Is that good for everyone? Yes.
Sure.
All right. Okay. So for our next question, this is another anonymous one. So which environmental issue do you think will require the most attention in the next 10 years? Parang Miss Universe yung mga question natin.
Yeah. Well, I wish to start by answering that question. We should learn from the COVID pandemic, and we should be preparing, especially our, capability in terms of dealing for solutions. Research and development is the key, actually, in this in resolving this foregoing pandemic, and likewise, government should prepare also. And us, I pose this challenge to the young engineers. What is your role in the next 10 years? Should you be the one promoting change? Should you be the one to be the frontliners? Should you be the one to engage in resolving these challenges? It's a posted challenge and question to everyone. So I hope that you as an engineer, us also, will be laying down the foundation of change, and also at the same time be the change you ought to be. So, well, speaking of pandemic and other challenges that may be faced in the next 10 years, this is something we will need to look up. We don't know what future lies behind, but preparation is the key. We have to be prepared. We have to be resilient, so that in any course, in any challenge we may face, we are ready. Thank you.
Yeah. And just to add to that, coming from Manila Water Foundation, so it's really hard to pinpoint just one environmental problem that we should focus on. But I think another issue that we could really focus on is water security for all, because as we all know, it's been depleting not only here in the Philippines but all over the world, and not everyone actually has access to the basic water needs, especially in areas here in the Philippines and even in Africa and some other Asian countries. So um, it's really sad to think about that fact that many people haven't even realized this basic need, and yet we are continuously depleting that resource. No? So I hope that the young engineers that we have here tonight, would be working towards solving these problems, and in our own little way we might be able to help solve it as well, by continuously being conscious about the water usage that we consume in our households, and even finding ways on how to innovate um, the wastewater usage, and even protecting the life below water. So, yeah, so those are some of the issues that we can, aside from the pandemic, and also we can focus on that moving in the next 10 years, probably.
All right, so I suppose we move on to the next question. What advice do you think as can you give to future engineers on how they can make innovations even if they're just students?
Well, I'm sure Roland's got lots to say on this, but for me, it's don't undervalue yourself. Like, age doesn't matter, experience doesn't matter when it comes to coming up with new ways of thinking. Actually, there's a lot of evidence that points to the fact that younger people are probably going to be more creative, more inventive than older people, because they don't have the same kind of baggage or legacy, in terms of their frame of reference. And I'm sure there's it's probably not the best example to use, but I'm sure there's a famous quote that was, when the Americans decided they wanted to get to the moon, the workforce, the people that got them there were predominantly under 35 years of age. So it wasn't those that had been, long in industry, really experienced, etc. It was the young minds that were, able to really think outside the box, that were able to tackle the challenge. So yeah, don't undermine yourself.
Completely agree with Katie. Age would not matter if you're trying to solve a problem that you see in society and perhaps a problem you're experiencing yourself. Whether you're a student, there, I think the top 4 tech founders in the world right now in Silicon Valley started when they were students. So, that's evidence enough for me that the likes of Bill, Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, there were second year college students, I think, in your sophomore year when they started their at least tinkering with their ideas, or even, I don't know, creating their own games at the age of 9. Those amazing stories, right? So yeah, uh, Katie's correct. Age will not matter. Whether you are a future engineer or a current engineer, there will always be problems to solve. And I think the crucial part there is having the courage to actually solve it. I've seen a lot of people who want who say they want to innovate or solve problems, but in terms of execution, um, they need some improvement in that, because it's what they call the audacity of zero, right? It's fun to say it, right? You sound cool, right? But I challenge you to execute. I challenge you to take the first step today if you can, and just do it.
And
Yeah.
don't undervalue the older voices either, I think. So
Yeah.
just don't make it an age thing.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, Chloe.
I'm not an engineer myself, but but by being a development worker, no, so my advice to the engineers here today would be, do not lose the heart to serve, because all of these innovation would be useless if the people will not be able to um, uh, will not be able to use or make use of these technologies that you do. And also, don't be afraid to start small, because small things create ripples in the end. So I think everything smart starts in a very within you, and then you just start to make it happen, and then more and more people will be you'll be surprised that more and more people will be there to support you along the way. Thank you.
Yeah, very nice. And in addition to that, well, find your starfish. And from that starfish, be inspired. As great things comes from small beginnings, sabi nga nila. Diba? Thank you.
And look no further, join Engineers Without Borders Philippines. Okay, so I suppose that is all the time we have. So let me thank you for the panel for answering our questions and for providing such insightful presentations for tonight. Let me remind everyone that the feedback survey and certificate is available through our streaming platform. Log in at events.experto.ph, accomplish the feedback survey, and the download button for the certificate will appear. From everyone here in EWB Philippines, before we end, Eman, you will plug something. Hello, Eman.
Oh, yes. Sorry. So everyone, so thank you very much for attending this webinar. So the link will be available after this talk. So just refresh your browsers later. I would like us also to invite you to to one of our webinars from Philippine Technological Council. So PTC, yes, is a member of Federation of Engineering Institutions in Asia and the Pacific. So we have our webinar this Saturday. So the topic would be on ICT trends and technologies that aid Asia Pacific countries during the global pandemic. So we have Taiwan, Singapore, did I miss anyone? And Malaysia. So it's a multinational panelists from FIAP countries from Asia and the Pacific. So the topic would be on ICT. So there's the link. It's also available on experto.ph, and you can also scan the QR code. So if you are interested about ICT and the role of ICT of engineering in ICT in the global pandemic, so I invite you to also attend this webinar on Saturday. Okay, thank you, Martel.
All right. So from everyone here in EWB Philippines, we thank you for attending our third webinar. Stay tuned for upcoming online events and stay safe and sane. Bye. Do end the broadcast na, Eman, yeah?
Thank you very much, you guys.
Well done.
Congratulations.
Great.
Thank you. Congratulations.
You have a
Thank
photo
you,
of the
everyone. Yeah.
panelists.
Okay.
This is a screenshot.
Yes, the new normal.
Yeah, the new
Group photo.
photo opportunity.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for the almost 1,000 participants. So this is our biggest
Wow.
number so far.
Wow.
It's okay.
Thank you for those who watching in YouTube, in Facebook Live, and Experto. And see you again in our next webinar.
See ya. Bye.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
Thank
everyone.
you.
Stay
Bye.
safe.
Bye. Bye.
The link for the what do you call that? The download link for the certificates is now available in Experto, in events.experto.ph. So get your certificates there. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.